TOC had a charged air that night. Second platoon gathered in the cramped, dimly lit briefing room, its walls lined with outdated maps and peeling paint that bore testament to years of use. Dust floated lazily through beams of yellow light, streaming from a single overhead lamp. Lifeline Squad, along with Devil, Killer, and Bang Bang squads, stood in loose formations, murmuring quietly among themselves as they waited for the briefing to begin. Our platoon leader, First Lieutenant Anderson, entered the room, his expression set in a grim mask. The murmurs died down as he stepped to the front. His presence demanded attention. A tall man with sharp features, Anderson had earned our respect through countless missions. He didn't waste time with small talk. "All right, listen up," he began, his voice low but firm. "We've got a high-priority mission. Intelligence indicates a compound built into the rocky hillside east of our position. It's being used as an IED factory, a weapons cache, and a stronghold for local Taliban leadership. Expect heavy resistance." I could feel the tension rising in the room. Missions like this weren't rare, but the mention of an IED factory always made my gut twist. Anderson continued, "Limited air support is available, and indirect fire missions are on standby. However, the terrain means they've likely got a tunnel system, so we need to be ready for anything." Jackson, a rifleman and usual skeptic of Devil Squad, raised a hand. "Sir, what's the plan if we hit heavy resistance before reaching the compound?" Anderson nodded. "Good question. Killer and Devil Squads will take point. Bang Bang will cover the rear. Lifeline, your QRF. If it gets thick, you'll be called up to reinforce. We'll punch through any resistance on the way there. We stop for no reason." I exchanged a glance with Ortiz, our gunner, who muttered, "Always the bridesmaid, never the bride." Ignoring Ortiz's muttering, Anderson motioned to a map pinned on the wall. "Staging point is here, 2 clicks from the compound. We'll dismount and proceed on foot from there. Be ready for anything. Sandstorm might hit tonight. If it does, we delay 24 hours. But until I say otherwise, assume we're going at 0500. The room was silent as Anderson wrapped up. "Gear check in an hour. I want everyone ready. Let's get moving." We filed out, heading back to our respective areas. The night air was cool and the wind was beginning to pick up, carrying a fine layer of dust. Ortiz was already laying out his gear, his usual grin replaced by a look of concentration. "Bet that storm hits," he said, glancing over at me. "No way we're moving out in this mess." "Better a delay than walking into an ambush blind," Delaney added, checking his rifle's magazine. I sat down on my cot, opening my med kit to double-check its contents. Gauze, tourniquets, morphine, field dressings, it was all there. Still, I checked again, an old habit I couldn't shake. Missions like this never went as planned. You prepared for the worst and hoped it didn't find you. As a medic, it would fall to me to keep my guys alive. No pressure. I shoved a few energy drinks and water bottles in the small gaps I could find. The guys would need fuel after all. The wind howled outside and the barracks shook slightly with each gust. Lying back, I stared at the ceiling, Delaney's earlier words echoing in my mind, walking into an ambush blind. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the thoughts, knowing sleep would be hard to come by. Morning came, but the storm hadn't let up. Instead, it intensified, the wind carrying thick clouds of sand that blotted out the early light. Visibility was down to a few meters, and the gritty air found its way into everything. Eyes, mouths, gear. Standing outside the barracks, I could barely make out the figures of soldiers moving around the compound. Lieutenant Anderson called for a quick formation in the mess tent, its canvas walls flapping violently in the wind. We gathered, pulling scarves and neck gaiters over our faces to keep the sand out. He didn't bother with formalities. "Storm's bad. Too bad to move in. Command's ordered a 24-hour delay. Use the time to rest and double-check your gear. We leave at dawn tomorrow if conditions improve." Delaney grumbled under his breath. "Great. More time to think about all the ways this can go wrong." "Think of it as a blessing," I said, brushing sand off my sleeves. "Better waiting here than walking into a firefight blind." Delaney chuckled. "Yes, young grasshopper, you are learning the wisdom of the infantry." Back in the squad bay, most of us tried to relax, but the tension lingered. Nguyen, our radio operator, spent the day fiddling with the comms, ensuring everything was in working order despite the storm. Ortiz played cards with a couple of guys from Devil Squad, cracking jokes to keep the mood light. I busied myself with more checks: gear, med kit, weapons. Anything to keep my mind occupied. By nightfall, the storm showed no sign of easing. The wind howled relentlessly, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Lying on my cot, I listened to the distant sounds of the storm, trying once again to shut out the thoughts swirling in my head. Tomorrow, storm or no storm, we'd probably be moving out. I just hoped we'd be ready. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the air clear. The ground was coated in a fine layer of sand, giving the landscape an otherworldly appearance. We mounted up in our Humvees, engines rumbling as the convoy prepared to move out. Second platoon was spread across multiple vehicles, with killer and devil squads leading the way. "Mount up, Lifeline," Carrington said to us. "We roll in 5. Delaney was behind the wheel of our Humvee, his usual grin absent as he focused on the task at hand. Ortiz manned the turret, his Ma Deuce 50 cal ready. Speck sat beside him, adjusting the radio headset. I took my usual spot in the back, medkit at my feet. Brooks sat between us. "Feels too quiet," Ortiz muttered, scanning the horizon. "Like they're waiting for us." "Keep your eyes open," Brooks replied, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "We're not getting caught with our pants down." The ride was tense but uneventful until we were about a click from the staging point. That's when the first shots rang out, sharp cracks echoing off the rocky hills. Small arms fire, scattered but deliberate. "Contact left," Ortiz shouted, swiveling the turret toward the source of the fire. Anderson's voice came through the radio. "Push through! We're almost there!" Delaney floored it, the Humvee lurching forward as bullets pinged off the armor. Ahead, I could see Killer Squad's vehicle taking evasive action, their gunner returning fire. The convoy didn't stop until we reached the staging area, a small, craggy side road that offered protection from all sides, save for above. We quickly dismounted and took up defensive positions. "Specs, get comms up," Carrington barked, scanning the ridge for enemy positions. "Lifeline, hold here until further orders." The gunfire had died down, but the tension remained. Ortiz stayed in the turret, eyes locked on the ridge. I crouched behind the Humvee, heart pounding as I checked my gear again. The calm before the storm never lasted long. The fight was brutal. Second platoon fought tooth and nail for very little ground. 2 soldiers were already injured by the 5th hour. One was shot through his left cheek, a grisly but survivable wound, and the other was shot in the knee, blowing the kneecap clean off. He wouldn't be fighting in the battle anymore, so we put him in a turret and he covered the ridgeline, the Ma Deuce barking with each round it spat out. After 10 hours of intense fighting, the morale was at an all-time low. 10 hours of chaos, smoke, blood and sand grinding into every exposed surface. The ridgeline ahead of us was scarred from repeated airstrikes, but the compound still stood, defiant and intact. The Taliban fighters had entrenched themselves deep, using tunnels and fortified positions to keep us at bay. Our progress had been slow and costly. "Doc, over here!" someone shouted. I turned to see a soldier from Devil Squad dragging another trooper, his leg bleeding profusely from a shrapnel wound. Without hesitation, I sprinted over, my medkit slamming against my side with each step. "Get him down," I ordered, dropping to my knees beside the wounded soldier. The trooper groaned in pain, his face pale and slick with sweat. My pack was getting light on medical supplies. "Hang tight, man. I got you," I said, applying a tourniquet above the wound. The flow of blood slowed, and I quickly dressed the injury. "You're good. It's a flesh wound. Don't be a bitch." He growled at me angrily through the pain. He waved off my pain medicine. "No? Suit yourself, more for me," I said cockily. I gave him his rifle and stood him up, and he limped back behind cover. The sound of gunfire was unrelenting, punctuated by the occasional thud of mortar rounds landing too close for comfort. I could hear Ortiz's M240 chattering away, laying down suppressing fire on a machine gun nest that had pinned down Killer Squad. His .50 caliber machine gun had ran out of ammo, so he took up his favorite toy. "Ortiz, keep that fire coming." Carrington's voice crackled over the radio. "We need cover to pull those guys back." "Roger that," Ortiz called back, his voice strained but steady. I finished securing the bandages on another wounded soldier who had several fingers missing and helped him to his feet. "Get to the staging area," I said, patting his shoulder, "and don't try to give anyone the finger. It won't work." I slapped his ass. He gave me a weak nod and grin before limping away, supported by his buddy. I made sure to cover them until they were removed from the battleground, taking shots at any enemy I could see. Returning to my position behind the Humvee, I scanned the battlefield. The enemy was well coordinated, their fire coming from multiple directions. It felt like every time we gained ground, we were pushed back by another wave of resistance. "We're getting nowhere," Delaney muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "This place is a goddamn fortress." He slapped a new magazine into his rifle and looked at me. "Well, that's my last mag. Better make it count." Anderson's voice came through the radio again, this time with a tone of finality. "All units, fall back to the staging area. We're calling in a heavy strike. I repeat, fall back to the staging area." "Fall back?" Brooks echoed in disbelief. "We've been at this all fucking day. Bullshit." "It's the right call," I yelled over the noise, pulling him back toward the Humvee. "We ain't getting in anytime soon." Reluctantly, Brooks followed. We covered each other as we retreated, firing at the enemy to keep their heads down. By the time we reached the staging area, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the battered landscape. "Everyone accounted for?" Anderson asked, his voice carrying over the din of distant gunfire. "Bang Bang's all here," their squad leader reported. "Devil and Killer took some hits, but we're good," came another voice. "Lifeline's intact," Carrington added, glancing around to make sure. Intact was putting it gently. "Good. Get some water, rest up, maintain defensive posture. Air support's en route. We'll end this soon," replied the LT. We didn't have to wait long. About 30 minutes later, the distinct rumble of an AC-130 filled the air. Anderson gave the order for all units to pull back further, ensuring we were well clear of the blast zone. "Here it comes," Brooks said, his voice tinged with both relief and awe. "The fireworks." The sky lit up as the gunship unleashed its fury. Tracers streaked through the darkening sky, followed by the thunderous roar of explosions. The ground shook beneath us as the compound was torn apart, debris and dust rising high into the air. We began to cheer and profane the Taliban's mothers, as if they could hear us over being obliterated. When the barrage finally ceased, there was a deafening silence. We stood there, watching the smoke billow from what was once a formidable enemy stronghold. The mission was over, but it didn't feel like a victory. "Let's go," Carrington said quietly. "We've got a long ride back." As we mounted up and prepared to leave, I began to replay the day's events. We had fought hard. Luckily, we didn't lose any good men. But in the end, it had taken overwhelming firepower to finish the job. There was no glory in it, just another day in a war that seemed endless. Ortiz leaned over from the turret as we started moving. "Hey, Doc, you did good today. You okay?" I nodded, too tired to respond. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic jostling of the Humvee became almost soothing as we left the battlefield behind. Somewhere in the distance, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the first stars into the evening sky. I trembled slightly, equal parts adrenaline crash and combat stress weighing on my already overburdened soul. I would have shed tears in that moment if I wasn't so desensitized and numb to the reality I found myself in. Another day down, another mission completed, but the weight of it all lingered, heavy and unrelenting. And I knew deep down that it wasn't something any of us would ever truly leave behind. But then again, I could say that for any particular day of the 12 months of hell we went through. The mission, according to the higher-ups, was a failure. We did not secure the compound. Instead, we had to resort to razing it to the ground to deny the enemy a stronghold in the region. We had no opinions either way. We had a job to do, and we keep doing it, however long that took.